dopamine is critical for movement. And it's important to keep that in mind because the other thing that dopamine does is it's involved in a set of brain circuits that are involved in motivation. So if you think about any animal, human, dog, rat, cat, monkey, bat, that animal has 3 choices for movement. You can move towards something, you can stay still, or you can move backward.
Right.
Dopamine is involved in motivation, not reward. So when you, like, what's something that you really enjoy doing?
Making quesadillas.
Making quesadillas. When you get the ingredients and you put them out, your dopamine is starting to rise.
Yeah, I'm feeling
it. If you're somebody who likes gambling, it's on the way to Vegas. You're walking in, you're getting your chips. It's the feel of the chips. The dopamine's going up. Okay. This is a hardwired set of circuits that were designed to have us do things that were adaptive. So dopamine starts to rise in anticipation of food when we're hungry, cold when we're hot, heat when we're cold, sex when we're horny.
Right.
Right. And it's going to be involved in anything that we think is going to bring a feeling or a resource.
So a lot of dopamine is based on perception?
Absolutely. You nailed it.
Wow.
In fact, whether or not we're talking about Bitcoin, US dollars, likes on Instagram or X, followers, views, or any of that, the currency is dopamine.
Got it.
There's one currency of motivation. So dopamine is about wanting and craving, not about having. Then something happens. You make the quesadilla.
Okay, hold on. Let me slow it down just real quick, Andrew, so that, because sometimes it's hard for me, so I know it might be hard for some of our listeners. But so the dopamine is based on the motivation. So it's not about like the fact that when I'm sitting there and I'm making my quesadilla, like that's the dopamine is like knowing that I'm gonna get the quesadilla soon. That's dopamine. But then when I actually get the quesadilla, what?
Okay, so it depends on the quesadilla. Let's go with 3 different scenarios.
Okay.
And we could change out quesadilla here for jackpot at the
casino
table,
sex,
winning a UFC fight, or winning the bet on the UFC fight,
being nervous about asking a girl out and then actually doing it.
Comedy when you move to crowd work and you're like, this feels like I'm out on a tightrope.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So any of those things, anything where there's a potential payoff, then something happens. Let's use the quesadilla example because it's straightforward. You have the quesadilla and it's pretty good. Tastes like the quesadilla you usually make. Okay, what happens? Your dopamine starts dropping a little bit.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but you're okay. Yeah, it starts dropping. Let's say, just by way of example, you eat 4 quesadillas. Each time, it's going to be a little bit less dopamine from the actual eating of the quesadilla.
Yeah, the second quesadilla, you can barely even taste it sometimes.
Let's say you bite into the quesadilla and it's like, this tastes weird. Like there's something off here. Dopamine plummets. So how much dopamine you get depends on the anticipation minus what you actually get, something called reward prediction error. But the language doesn't really matter. That's a bunch of nerd speak for when an experience is worse than you expected, your dopamine drops below where it started.
Wow.
When an experience is better than you expected, surprise, it's way above where you started. And it stays up there for a while. So the dopamine system loves surprise. Now, all of this is related to learning. This is an ancient system designed for you to learn where are the payoffs? Where's the water? Where's the food? Where are the mates? Where's the money? Where's the resources? These are ancient circuits that we are doing non-ancient things with. And so, for instance, if you do comedy tours, right? When you do your comedy tours and like you really nail it one night, like really nail it. It does 2 things. It raises your baseline level of dopamine. So the next time you go out, you have confidence, right? You're still feeling that. But it also raises the threshold for dopamine, right? Now it's harder to get dopamine. You can't have the same experiences that you had prior to that really killer night and get the same amount of dopamine that you used to. I mean, the most important thing to think about is how quickly does it go up? How quickly and how far does it go down? Because every time it goes up, it goes down. Why? Because remember earlier we were saying everything's like a seesaw. If you feel motivated, there is, and this is so important for people to understand, especially people with compulsions, addictions, and this kind of thing, the better it feels, the lower you're going to feel afterwards, and the longer it will take you to get back to baseline. So the drug of all drugs for this, to really nail home dopamine as a concept.
Sex. Or what? Food.
Well, behaviorally, sex. You're right. Okay. So, and people have behavior addictions, process addictions. Methamphetamine.
Yeah.
If you were going to look at what creates the biggest rise in dopamine the fastest, so it's dopamine over time, okay? Because listen, when you write jokes, or, when I'm, reading papers, I love reading science papers. I'm like mining for papers. Every once in a while, I'll take a little break, and I'm super into cephalopods, octopuses. I'm building an octopus tank at home right now. Ooh. So that's kind of my indulgence is octopus. It's a little bit of dopamine.
Right.
Methamphetamine is a huge rapid increase in dopamine. Then what happens?
How much do we get off that? Bring it up real quick. I just want to see what is
it's how fast it occurs. It occurs within minutes. This is why crack cocaine was so much more addictive than snorted cocaine, right? It was the speed with which it hits the system.
How much dopamine does an activity release?
Yep.
Baseline is 100%. Food is 150%. So an 50% increase. Video games, 175%. Sex, 200.
I disagree with sex, by the way. I think it depends on, if you're, and people should know this, if you live with somebody and you guys are having sex a lot and you've known each other a long time, there's a lot of the reason why people are like looking for novelty in their relationship, et cetera. I'm not trying to be salacious here, but new sexual partner is probably about 400, 500%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think most people would not dispute that.
Cocaine goes to 450%. Amphetamine, 1,000%. Methamphetamine, 1,300%.
That methyl group increases the speed. That speed increases dopamine.
So it's almost the same. It could potentially almost be kind of the same, but the speed at which it happens is so much greater that it intensifies it so much.
That's right. And remember, the brain is thinking in terms of approach, pause, or retract. So when there's a ton of dopamine, listen, anyone on cocaine or methamphetamine, everything's a good idea to them.
Oh, yeah, anything.
Right.
Oh,
and then you think about cannabis. Cannabis has its own discussion, its own effects, but very different system and tends to make people pretty happy with right where they are. The opioids tends to make people overly happy with right where they are. They tend to be amotivated, not motivated. So dopamine, in this context, what happens is then dopamine drops below baseline after a drug or porn, or even, if somebody's, let's say they make the huge mistake of like going outside their marriage to a prostitute or something. It's the anticipation, the fear, the excitement, boom, then it drops below baseline. And now here's the real rub. In order to get back to baseline, most people, when they're in that trough, what do? They use more. But each time they use, while they're in that trough, when dopamine is low, this is the key thing. When dopamine is low, no matter how much you do of that substance, no matter how much you engage in that behavior, that dopamine is going to have less and less of an effect, and it's not even going to get you above baseline.
Wow.
You have to wait. The period of abstinence is when these circuits return to normal. And with the exception of alcohol, where people can die from rapid withdrawal, this is why every addiction recovery program has a period of abstinence. They don't tell you to kind of taper off cocaine.
Right.
They're like, listen, this has got to stop. And then when people relapse, the problem is they get, no pun intended, they get a bump, but that dopamine level is not where it used to be. And they're constantly, quote unquote, chasing the dragon or whatever you want to call it. So, these dopamine circuits evolved for a good reason, to drive us toward adaptive behaviors. But listen, I have friends in the tech sector, in the finance sector. You see this in the finance guys. It's often finance guys. They're doing Adderall, they're day trading, they're night trading, their friends are making a ton of money. And we also have the social comparison thing. So I'm not going to say that social media hijacks all of this, but let's just say, and I love social media. I'm on Instagram and X. I teach there. I learn there. Love your content. Love Segura's content. Rogan. I'm learning there. Tim Dillon, right? Like I love it.
Yeah.
But there are elements of this where if you find yourself on social media, but you're kind of like, what am I doing here? Like this is like nothing's happening here. You are in a dopamine trough.
You're in a trough.
So
you've already gotten your high.
You've gotten it, and we hear it. Dopamine hits. If it were really dopamine hits, you'd be going, whoa, yeah, amazing, cool.
Right.
No, that happens now and again. But what's happening is the threshold for what really draws you in is getting higher and higher.
Which goes to show why when it comes sometimes to like sex addiction and pornography addiction, that people's, what the kink that they need or the thing they need to see gets more out there. Because they have to, just to even get back to the baseline, they have to, they've got to find more. They need a higher arc.
Definitely.